Hello students, we have discussed the French Romanticism and German Romanticism. In Europe, we have discussed that about the Romanticism and the contributions made by German theorists and French theorists to develop the concept of the Romanticism. As we have seen, the French Romanticism cast a deep impact on, on the English Romanticism. The French Revolution took place and it caused the values like liberty, fraternity, and these equality. So these three pillars are accepted and influenced the saint of the Romanticism in English Romanticism, like Wordsworth, St. Coleridge. They were under the impression of the French Revolution, and that has generated the great impact on revolutionary ideas that was against the contemporary neoclassical theory of literary creation or poetic creation. So English Romanticism started the mid 18th century and it was later on expedited by the French Revolution, and that was the age of transition. Like European counterparts or romanticist, English romanticists supported the French Revolution and believed on the neoclassical, believed on repudiation of neoclassical features. This opposition could lead, seen both in creative and theoretical perspective as well as critical writings. William Wordsworth rejected the neoclassical rules of poetry in his composition and emphatically argued against it in a canonical so-called preface, which was supposed to be, which has been the William Wordsworth's theory. The theory, the preface or the theory is a justification of a kind of poetry that William Wordsworth and Coleridge attempted in their respective poetry. So the romantic concept of the poetry is a driving feature. It is clear cut. Its concepts are very basically deep rooted. The concepts are very much acceptable to the contemporary because it brings the fresh air from the nature. It brought the freshness. It brought the freshness of the nature, the pleasant atmosphere, the light and very playful symbols and themes in their respective poetry. And Wordsworth's poetry, Keats's letters are excellent examples of the romantic theories. Keats wrote his letters to his friend, and that expresses his views on imagination, his views on negative capability. It's a excellent pieces of his theory as well as criticism. He never attempted to compose a separate treatise just like William Wordsworth. The poet St. Coleridge wrote Biographia Literaria, and his characters are also the part of the romantic theory. His arguments, his contribution, especially towards the fancy and imagination, are very good and very nicely elaborated in the biography and literature. Apart from Coleridge, we have P.B. Shelley, whose critical bent of time and defense of poetry against the charges made by critics like Thomas Love Peacock said that poetry is immoral and of no use. English satirist, essayist, and poet who conceived this idea. Romanticism, in the characteristics of individual ways, practiced it according to their compositions. The pre Romantic poets like Thomas Gray, Robert Burns, William Wordsworth, Oliver Goldsmith were the high romanticists. For the sake of convenience, we may divide the English romanticists in the two groups. As we have seen, the early romantic critics like William Blake, William Wordsworth, S.T. Coleridge, and later group which come up quite later are P.B. Shelley, John Keats, Lord Byron. So it is important to know these poets shared the common grounds and tried to free the poetry from the rules that the neoclassical writers held dear. It's a kind of artificial poetry. It's a deliberate poetry. It doesn't have anything creative, anything imaginative or feelings. So these new so-called ideas propagated by romanticists came down and very much acceptable to the readers as well as the theorists. So like this, in the early group of English Romanticists, William Blake was the first important figure. His views were quite acceptable because he proposed imaginative and religious imagination. So as a citizen of England, he was very much alert to the political developments and social ills of his time. As a sensitive critic, he believed that his task was to harmonize opposites and contradictions. His interest in arts like engraving, painting further deepened his artistic vision, as well as his mythical or myth making or system. He developed a visionary system that is very base to the romantic poetry. His poems are characterized by the political fervor and visionary essays. Another romantic writer was Walter Scott. In his romantic elements driven to dreamy historical past, and this historical past has deep significance to the imaginative type of writing. Local landscape and Scottish legends, heroes, aristocratics of the past caused heavy influence on the writers. His magical romances often represented the nostalgic urge for the past glory and love for the nation. William Wordsworth, along with his friend Coleridge, was responsible for the development of the Romanticism. He was a passionate supporter of French Revolution. His ideals that he upheld are liberty, equality, and fraternity. He tries to bring into reality. The example that we see is taken from the prelude. You can take the bliss was in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven o'er times, in which the meagre style forbidden ways of custom, law, and statute took at once the attraction of a country in romance. But the revolution disappointed him, and his generation he distanced himself from politics, idealism. He proposed new theory of poetry. In the preface of this anthology, it became his manifesto of the Romanticism. He championed the use of real language, real life. His views of the poet was man speaking to men about men. He regarded poetry as a springing from emotion recollected in tranquility. He stressed the qualities mostly dealing with emotional intensity, simplicity, and spontaneity. His love for nature, his love for nature to forget the painful aspects of his life, the solitude that he wished to propagate are the examples of this. St. Coleridge was a poet, a critic, and most influential figure of English Romanticism. So, with Wordsworth, he propagated his romantic theory. He turned to German philosophers like Kant, Schlegel, and Schelling for his views. His ideas of imagination was based on them. He was also influenced by Shakespeare's dramatic art and also commented on the Shakespeare's work of art. He knew the magical power, visionary power, dream sequences, supernatural powers that are very much dear to St. Coleridge, and that is what we have seen in the Christabel, Kubla Khan. These poems do consist of supernatural elements. This seminal type of, say, contribution gave him a new direction to the critical study of Shakespeare's work. He celebrated his fancy and the types of imagination. Imagination is a rare gift that reconciles the opposite qualities and gives delight to the reader. The creative role of imagination. He distinguished between primary imagination and secondary imagination. Lord Byron is another theorist. He was a notorious for his lifestyle. He's exerted great influence on English poetry. Byronic hero is Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. It's a contribution that he made. Byronic hero may be called as a lonely person, proud but unhappy. He stays away from family, friends, and society, but enjoys the company of women. He loved the French ideas of liberty, fraternity. He commented critically on the artificial use of language because it affects. The obvious hero of the Baron is a prototype of Byron himself. P.B. Shelley is another theorist. As we have seen, the later Romanticist, his radical version of Romanticism is proposed in the theory and practice. His rationale of Romanticism was that he compared the poetry with science and poetry with philosophy. In both respects, when compared, poetry tops in comparison to the science and philosophy. शेलीने पोएट्री म्हणजे साहित्याची तुलना सायन्स आणि फिलॉसॉफी दोघांशी केली. सायन्समध्ये रिझन असतं, विचार करायला मिळतो, पण पोएट्रीमध्ये धोका आहे. प्लेजर आनंद शिकवणं, teaching moral instructions हे जे function आहे, that makes it philosophy or literature strong one. So we have to this consider poetry for him source of pleasure and beauty. It is noteworthy to consider P.B. Shelley here. So with this we come to end of today's lecture. Thank you.